Here are the two characters that mean butterfly. Suppose I were to tell you that the second character here is a symbol of an insect next to a symbol of a leaf. At first, that would seem easy to believe, both in communicating the sense of the word butterfly and in terms of the way other Chinese characters are constructed. However, the modern meanings and etymologies ascribed to characters make simple explanations difficult to believe. I can almost guarantee that your teacher or textbook told you that no, this was just phonetic, or said that it was a totally arbitrary symbol used to mean butterfly. Here, on the left side of the screen, you can see a character that means flower, and if you recognize the tree radical, you can see that it's a tree with an extra symbol added at the top. So, looking on the right-hand side of the screen, it seems easy to believe that the meaning leaf could be, similarly, a tree with an extra symbol at the top, even if we can't see the direct resemblance to a flower in one case, nor a resemblance to a leaf in the other. Of course, it already takes a lot of imagination to see a tree when you're looking at the tree radical. To digress on that point briefly, the first thing you learn in studying ancient characters is to look for the resemblance of one character to another, because the resemblance to the actual things depicted has almost always disappeared. In this example, we can see that one character is a human arm, curving as it reaches downward, and the other is basically the same image inverted, curving as it reaches upward. There is barely any connection between the pictograph and the modern meanings of these two words, and there is definitely zero resemblance between the ancient form and the modern writing style. However, the two characters are still linked. They still have a close resemblance, reflecting the original logic of the language, even if that logic is now unknown to us. You may be disappointed to learn that the ancient image of an arm is never used to actually mean arm. So while the numeral 9 is a cryptic drawing of an arm, the word that actually means arm is an unrelated puzzle involving the meat radical. Neither native speakers of the language nor foreigners learn Chinese in this way, learning the etymology and the relationships between the components and their meanings. The Kangxi system of radicals can be much more misleading than helpful in encouraging us to think of components in terms of the categories that organize the dictionary. This is one of the first words you're likely to learn in Chinese, partly because it so often appears on street signs, in the name of businesses, and so on. The modern meaning is similar to an era in time, sometimes suggesting a generation of people, sometimes meaning the world as a whole. If your teachers or textbooks told you anything about the symbol, they probably claimed that it was an elaboration of an ancient symbol for the numeral 30. Here's what that ancient numeral looks like, in both the modern standard script and in seal script. As Chinese characters go, it neither has any resemblance to the modern character on the left, nor does it resemble the seal script. Conversely, someone could easily say that these two characters resemble each other more than either one resembles a picture of a leaf. However, that's just as spurious as saying that the symbol for a flower shown before doesn't resemble a flower, or complaining that the numeral 9 resembles an arm for no good reason at all. The theory that this character came from an obsolete numeral created another problem in compiling Chinese dictionaries. The numeral 30 isn't a radical, and is instead grouped under the radical 10, perhaps for lack of a better alternative. So we have this idea that the sense of one generation could come from the numeral 30, despite the lack of any graphical connection between the characters, reinforced by the categories applied to the characters in the dictionary. Shi, the symbol on the left, has ended up categorized under the numeral 1, the single brushstroke E. Just looking at the characters, it would be impossible to guess that the radical was the horizontal line in the middle of it. And, of course, all of the connections between the component symbols and the character's meaning are difficult to believe, whether we're talking about 10, 30, or 1. The Kangxi system of radicals is not perfect, and doesn't pretend to have a category that makes sense for every character. However, one idea reinforces the other. People come to regard this symbol, in isolation, as derived from and linked to numerals, and then they read that meaning into the combined characters. Here you see the exact same symbol with the addition of the grass radical at the top, and the modern meaning is simply leaf. So we have the same graphic symbol preserved, and the same meaning preserved. This is the best and most obvious kind of evidence you could hope for, and it isn't hidden away in an obscure or obsolete character. So, regarded in isolation, This just corroborates the link between the meaning of leaf and the image as a whole. But in fact, it also corroborates the link between leaves and the further meaning of an era or a generation in time. Given that we've got a link that's both evident in the ancient pictographs and corroborated in the modern meaning of the words to some extent, it should be easy for people to see that sh here really is a leaf, and that the character for a butterfly has a lot to do with a leaf and an insect, and has nothing to do with the numeral 30, and so on. However, there are two problems. One is that this symbol has disappeared in mainland China, making it easy to forget, as modern simplification assigned the sound and meaning to a totally unrelated character. So the connection between the characters has become invisible. Secondly, most people impose the meaning of the component onto the character as a whole. Even the traditional character for leaf is now explained as if it were an indirect inference from the numeral 30. The sense of leaf is supposedly inferred from the numerical sense of many generations of a tree passing, instead of reading the pictograph of a leaf as a hint at the meaning of an era in time. So, as puzzles go, this one can be solved by looking at the characters, both ancient and modern, but the connections between the characters are obfuscated by modern dictionaries, modern etymologies, and modern language reforms. It makes sense that the butterfly is an insect associated with the leaf, and it makes more sense for the changing leaves to be associated with changing generations than it does for us to get the same meaning out of an obscure numeral. Now, admittedly, it's never enough with Chinese to just say, this makes sense, because all kinds of things that are true don't make sense, and things that make sense aren't true. But the connections we're looking at here have become invisible in modern simplified Chinese. The character for the leaf was reformed, but the character for the butterfly was not. In theory, simplified Chinese could have the same arbitrary symbol for a leaf, replacing the ancient symbol in all characters, such as this example meaning butterfly. But it doesn't. And ancient Chinese already has so many amazing inconsistencies that this sort of modern addition to the confusion is not appreciated. Meanwhile, almost all of the explanations you'll encounter have instead tried to argue that the symbol is devolved from the numeral 30, along with the suggestion that 30 years implied an era or a generation of mankind. That idea is not supported by the seal script, it's not supported by oracle bones, nor by any other evidence. But it is reflected in the way the dictionaries are organized, and has produced a lot of confusing explanations. In general, those will be the explanations you receive, if any, from teachers and textbooks, partly because those teachers and textbooks have to cope with the dictionaries. Well, I don't think that sh has any link to the numeral 30. I did present one contrasting example in this video, showing that a modern numeral can be derived from almost any symbol imaginable. There is, currently, no explanation for why or how the image of an arm reaching upward came to represent the numeral 9 in the Chinese language.